Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 18 of Groove, the No Treble podcast, which you can always find at notreble.com. My name is Mitch Joel, and let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Arthur Barrow. I am a bass player and composer and arranger and producer and all that kind of stuff. I also play guitar and keyboards. I live in Los Angeles, California. I'm sitting in my own little studio that I have here in Mar Vista. And let's see, what else would you like to know?
Well, I know all that, and I would ask you if someone said, "Well, where would I most know you from?" I think I know the answer.
Well, that would be from Frank Zappa, playing in Frank Zappa's band, almost certainly. I played in his band from summer of 1978 through the end of 1980. I did, I guess 4 complete tours with him, and I recorded several albums. My first one that I did was Joe's Garage, which was a pretty popular one. I also did You Are What You Is, and I'm on most of Shut Up and Play Your Guitar, at least the first version of it. I mean, first iteration of it. Let's see, I'm also on, Tinseltown Rebellion. Some tracks on Them or Us, and Drowning Witch, I think it's called. A couple. He does so many albums. Man from Utopia, that's another one.
So,
and Buffalo, that was a live album that was released a few years ago, which I was really stoked about. I think they did a great job on it, and it was really nice to hear a complete show from beginning to end, with warts and all. And they did a great job mixing it, and even Frank would have never released it because Frank did something he rarely did, which was make some mistakes. He forgot the lyrics, I think, in "Honey, Don't You Want a Man Like Me" at one point. So anyway, you were going to ask another question?
Yeah. So look, your career is really diverse, and we're going to sort of crack the walnut open and dive in for sure in this. But I was most surprised in terms of really digging a bit deeper into your timeline. There's a moment of compression that I want to run through with you. One, I want to understand if that timing is accurate, and then 2, I'm just fascinated with how things came together. If I'm led to believe everything you read on the internet, and why wouldn't we, to be honest? You started playing the electric bass in 1974, which was at University College.
Right.
1975, you decided to move to LA with the goal of playing with Frank Zappa as one of the things you wanted to do. And in 1978, you auditioned and actually did join Frank Zappa's band.
That's correct.
Okay, this is chaos crazy to me. I find that timeline insane, that like a year later, after just starting to play this instrument, you've got this thing you want to be in. I mean, can you walk me through that year and a half? Because it's almost like an unheard of timeline.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd picked up a bass a few times before then, and always kind of liked it and had a feel for it. And when I was at music school, I was a composition major. My instrument was actually classical pipe organ, playing Bach fugues and stuff. My first instrument was electric guitar, and I had bought my Stratocaster with a whammy bar and played in bands in high school. And I needed to stay in college in order to not go get killed in Vietnam. So I was lucky to end up at North Texas, which is a really great music school, but you couldn't major in Stratocaster with a whammy bar. And my father was an organist and had recently got an organ that he bought a beautiful Hammond organ that I still have, and so I took organ lessons as my high school graduation present, and I'm getting to the bass, don't worry. But I went to school I went to North Texas. One of the reasons I went there is because they had the electronic music labs with fabulous Moog synthesizers in them, and I was also very interested in that at the time. So I ended up at North Texas, and during that, I was a Zappa fan already by the time I got there, and during that time, Frank just kept putting out just better and better music. He put out, he did the Waka Jawaka and Grand Wazoo, and then had the Overnight Sensation, which was just wonderful, which has Montana and other great songs on it, and then of course I loved the Roxy album, and I just, as time went on and I was going through music school, I became more and more of a Zappa fan, to the point where I thought, man, I really want to play with this guy. And I thought to myself, well, he already plays guitar. It was before the time he would hire like a Steve Vai or a Warren Cucurullo to be the kind of, hotshot lead guitar player, playing parts and stuff. It was always just him in the band for the most part. And I thought, well, he doesn't need a guitar player because, he plays guitar. And as far as keyboard players, I know I can never be as good as somebody like George Duke. But I liked playing the bass, and I had a feel for it, and I just thought, well, maybe I could do it if I played bass. And so I went out and bought a bass. I bought a Precision bass, which I no longer have, unfortunately. I sold it at one point. But anyway, I bought that and just started practicing. And around that time, like I say, the Roxy album came out, and I heard Tom Fowler playing the line on Echidna's Harp, the quintuplet line, doubling the melody, and I was just floored. It blew my mind. I didn't ever imagine that a clumsy old bass guitar could go booba dooba 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 dooba, and I found that very inspirational. And so I just bought a bass and started practicing, and finished up music school in 1975. I put in my 4 years. Some of my friends, wanted to stay in the academic world and work on their masters and whatnot. But I loved music school, but 4 years was enough, and like I say, I also picked up the bass because I thought it would round out my abilities. Could fill a lot of places if I could play guitar, keyboards, and bass. That you can cover a lot of rock and pop kind of real estate with that. And I just headed off to California. I had a friend, Phil Glosserman, who'd moved here shortly before I did, and it encouraged me to come out. And of course, Zappa was here, and I told my friends in Denton at North Texas, well, I'm going to go to LA and play with Frank Zappa. They probably thought I was crazy, and probably was a little bit. But, I just kept practicing really hard on the bass. When I got to LA, I quickly hooked up with Don Preston, who introduced me to the Fowler brothers, and I took some bass lessons from Tom Fowler himself, and just kept working. And during that time, between 75 and 78, it was a time when you could actually make a living as a musician just playing like in top 40 bands, playing weddings and high school dances and that kind of thing. And, a little bit of minor session work, demos and whatnot. But it was actually, I was making a viable living more or less. And just kept, listening to that. One of the great things that timing wise for me that happened is just a month or two after I moved to Los Angeles, Frank, put out One Size Fits All, which to this day is my favorite Frank Zappa album. It's just loaded with great stuff. Inca Rhodes and Andy and Florentine Pogan, and it's just a great album. And that was an inspiration too. And I just started working on the stuff. Like, for example, I loved Inca Rhodes, and I decided it would be an interesting thing to practice if I picked out the melody on Inca Rhodes and learned it on the bass guitar, something that's not played. I think part of the melody is played by Tom on the album version, but I just decided that would be something to work on and make a good exercise. And I worked on the other difficult Zappa stuff that I could find. Of course, Jaco Pastorius was exploding on the scene at that time, and I also bought a fretless bass, and I was real inspired by Jaco, and learned Teen Town and some of the other stuff, and so it was a real inspiration to aspire to be a great bass player at that time. And one thing led to another. Because of my connections, I kept meeting more people in the Zappa circle, and Don had given me Frank's phone number, and my friend Phil, who'd talked me into coming out here in the first place, called me one day and said he'd heard that Zappa was auditioning drummers and bass players. And so that was my moment to get out that number and call Zappa. And I told him that that I had been that I'd learned the melody to Inca Roads off the record by ear as something to practice, and he's I think he maybe didn't believe me, and asked if I would if I knew St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast, and the middle part of it that goes da 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 da, and I said, well, learn that by ear off the record, and play that for me at your audition, which would have turned out to be in about, I think, a week or 10 days from that time. And so I did, and I learned it. I put it on my reel-to-reel tape recorder at 7.5 and slowed it down to 3 3/4, so I could pick out those fast, funny little notes, and I did. And so when I went to my audition and came to be my turn, and Frank came over and I said, well, here's that thing you wanted me to learn from St. Alfonso's, and I whipped it out and played it for him, and he listened. He says, well, there's a few wrong notes in there, but you have potential. And, he liked me, and there was a bunch of other players there. I learned later that the day before there'd been 30 or 40 other bass players, and there was 25 or 30 when I was there. And he told me he liked me and told me he wanted me to stick around. He wanted to hear some other people, other combinations of bass and drums. And anyway, ended up settling on me. And when he told me I had the gig, I was pretty happy, to say the least.
So, I mean, it's somewhat easy to reflect on it and sort of, didactically go through that. But you're a fan of his music. You got the phone number. What was that sort of pre-phone call, or were you just like, I got this, I'm going to call him and speak to him like he's a human being, versus a person who was growing, admired, respected? You're sort of calling him like, hey, I want to play. I mean, it doesn't seem as simple as that. What was going through your brain?
It really was, okay. Because Don had given me the phone number. He thought I would enjoy having it. It's kind of, I don't particularly remember the circumstances of that, but he said, well, here's Frank's phone number if you want. And of course, I didn't call it right away, but I waited, like I said, until I heard that he was auditioning people. And I thought, well, it's time to call him.
When you walk in that first time, what were you? I mean, these are, again, people respect. That he, doesn't have much tolerance unless you can really hustle and play. How did you prep for that?
How did I prep for meeting him for the audition? I just practiced as much as I possibly could. And I do remember I got there a little bit early, and I kind of got friendly a little bit with the roadies, and he said not to bring an amp. There'd be a bass amp there. And so I think I was probably the first one there because I was so eager. And like I said, I got to know the roadies, and they got me plugged into an amp, and I was already plugged in and playing, I think, when Frank arrived. And he just walked over and shook my hand, and like I just told you, I whipped it out and played it. And when he finally hired me, kind of hired me tentatively for a couple of days. I have to go back and actually look at my book with my timeline myself, because I tend to forget. But he was going to hire you tentatively to the end of the week, and I said, okay, cool. But the next day he came in with a bunch of sheet music to sight read through, bass parts. And although I've never been a particularly great reader, I understood his music. I understood how he thought to a large degree. Like, for example, if you see a 5, whether it's 5/8 or a quintuplet in the Zappa's music, it's almost always going to be 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3. Almost never 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2. Same with 7s. It's almost always going to be 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. And so I would see that stuff, and it wouldn't throw me. I like plow right through that, no problem. Whereas other guys, like there was the guys maybe with heavy chops, Berkeley guys that could sight read stuff, and they'd see a bunch of 16th notes, and they could blow through that faster than I could probably. But they saw a quintuplet, all of a sudden they'd like freak out and say, what the hell is that? They didn't have any experience with that. So I had the edge as far as that went. So we did a little sight reading and took a break, and Frank took me aside and shook my hand and said, you don't have to wait till the end of the week. You got the gig. You're one of the best bass players I've ever played with. And asked me a few questions like, I said, do you have a passport? And I said, yeah. I said, do you like to fly? I said, sure. It was before the time of the way flying is now and all the crap we have to go through. It was kind of fun and easy. And he said, are you a drug addict? And I said, no. and I was in.
Okay, there's a lot I want to ask you about that exact component of it. So when somebody like Frank Zappa says that to you, and in your brain, are you saying, well, look, I've got a musical background. You sort of walked through it, but you started playing guitar when you were 13. You've got a family history of there being music in your family. You had a proclivity to it. You obviously studied it in university, but you are sort of playing this instrument more seriously for about a year. Somebody like Frank Zappa says that. I'm almost at the point in my brain, as you say that story, where I'm like, all right, I don't need much else in life. I mean, that's pretty much a higher level of accolades that you don't need more.
Well, yeah. I mean, I felt like I could have jumped 30 feet up in the air. I was completely ecstatic and beside myself. It was fantastic. It was a dream come true.
Now, I'm also curious about the drug addict thing. Well, these were different times, so we have to sort of frame it. This wasn't 2016. We're talking about the very late 70s, 80s. Very, very tough time. Lots of stories about the band, the people, the environment that you're in. This was an issue to him?
Well, yeah, as you may know, Frank was very anti-drug.
Very anti-drug.
And, I don't know what he meant necessarily by drug addict. He could have meant, shooting heroin into my arm, something I never did. I'm terrified of needles and have never had any desire to inject street drugs into my veins. But, he could have meant, you smoke pot all the time, or right. or you do cocaine. There was a lot of cocaine going around at that time.
Big time, yeah.
And he just didn't want that in the band if he could help it. There was always plenty of it going on anyway.
But that's what I was going to say. So if you can help it, and you have the band leader and someone who everybody knows and loves and sort of holds up, but you are in an environment, whether it's just being on the road gigs, other people, maybe not even the band members that are doing it. How does that balance? I mean, it must have been crazy.
Well, it's. Yeah, I don't want to get into it too much because I don't want to start, naming names.
Yeah, without naming, and I'm not looking for that.
But it's more
about the culture.
Yeah, I mean, it was there. It was around. The roadies did it. Some guys did it. I'm not perfect. I indulged a little bit for a while there, but and Frank, oddly enough, Frank would. Guys would get busted sometimes, and he wouldn't necessarily fire them without naming a name. One guy, the very first tour, had a bag of pot in his pants and got busted with it coming into London, and somehow Frank got him off the hook. And there was another guy with it. Actually, I can't remember what the story exactly, but there was something that they raided his room and. And I think he jumped out a window or something. Frank got him off the hook and didn't fire him. So, he had a lot of bluster about, maybe you've heard the story Frank talks about, if something goes wrong in the band and when you're fired, he'd say, his little joke was, would you like a window seat or an aisle seat for your ticket back to L.A.?
Right, great line, yeah.
But, he was sort of, I would say, purposely ignorant of it, perhaps.
Right.
I remember there was one guy who was, got pretty bad and a singer, and I remember going up to Frank's house this years later after I left the band, and we're listening to him. He said, God, I don't know. It seemed like his voice has changed. It doesn't sound right. Do you know what's going on with that? And I just said, no, Frank, sorry, I don't, even though I did. I just wasn't going to be the one to talk about that. Yeah.
So in that time, let's shift to what I really care about, which is music and you being an artist and you being a creative person, which clearly was indicating in your life from a fairly early phase, I think, if you study your history. Tell me about that phase. How are you evolving musically, just being not just around Frank, but around the players and the other people who want to be a part of it because of what everybody knows is to be the Frank Zappa universe?
Well, are you talking about from like my childhood or early bands, or just starting when I'm in the band?
Yeah, when you're in the band. I'm just assuming your skills, passion, exposure, creativity, it starts delting. It just starts going crazy.
Well, yeah. I will say I guess probably my first impression is that was as much as I'd studied Frank's music and learned it and worked on it and loved it and thought about it, it was still about 10 times harder to do than I expected. Things like, for example, it's like, oh, Frank said, well, can you sing? I said, well, yeah, a little bit. Oh, okay, you'll be doing harmonies. So now I'm not only worrying about my bass parts, I'm worrying about singing vocal harmonies. And one of those, it was kind of, oops, oh, sorry, I yanked my cable there. Am I still there?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I jerked on my earphones.
That's cool.
For example, there's a song called Stick It Out, which has some rather obscene lyrics to it. It's about animal sex with a pig, and that song ended up on Joe's Garage. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
are you kidding? I was so young then. That was like the craziest thing you could ever hear. I mean, played that song countless times. Couldn't believe it.
So I had my little apartment in Echo Park where, of course, we'd rehearse for 6 to 8 hours a day, and then I'd go home and keep practicing, learning my part. Like they just signed me, like it's like signed like hours of homework, to do before the next day on top of rehearsal. So part of my thing, I had to sing the part in Stick It Out. It was at the very top of my range, so the only way I could hit the note was at full volume. So I'm there in my apartment in Echo Park playing the bass and singing at the top of my lungs, "Fuck me, you ugly son of a bitch." Oh, can you say that on a podcast? I don't know.
You just did.
But and I don't know what the neighbors thought, but that was one thing. And I had to learn I had a lot of catching up to do because the band had been playing all the songs that were on the Shake Your Booty album, which had not been released yet. So I hadn't heard any of those. Frank gave me a cassette of it and told me to start learning those songs. And a lot of those songs had vocal parts on them too. So there was a lot of homework to do in that regard. And then the other aspect of it that I hadn't really given a lot of thought to was just the jamming part. I just always kind of took that for granted. So, solo, I would have fun and jam a little bit. And, but Frank took that, I guess you'd say, more seriously than I guess I realized. And, I was very, very fortunate that I got in the band with the drummer Vinny Colaiuta at the same time. We along with Ike, we were the three new guys. And, Vinny, of course, is to me not only the best drummer I've ever played with, I think he's the best drummer that ever was born, walked the planet. He's just absolutely amazing in every possible way. He's a great sight reader. He can play all the complicated stuff. He can groove his ass off. There's nothing he can't do. And he's a great improviser. And, one of the things early on, jamming with Frank, he was like this may have even been in the audition. I can't exactly remember, but like we were, playing stuff, jamming on something for a while, and after we stop and he praises Vinny, it's like, and he turns to me and says, "Well, you're getting about 80% of it," and I was like very disappointed, and he says, "Oh, you're just not, I don't know, following me right or something." And I said, "Well, what am I supposed to have, ESP or something?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, I'll work on that." Wow. And I think apparently did it well enough that he like I was saying, I'm on most of the first set of Shut Up and Play Your Guitar things, so I guess I learned how to do it well enough that he released a ton of it. So and had was happy with that album too, because the bass was actually prominent in the mix. You could hear it well. So I guess I eventually got up to 100% on that part. But there was just gosh, there's just a million things to learn. And so here's another thing is like, your brain can get pretty fried. And one of the ways that Frank works is he, I pick up his guitar and he has some riff, some, weird, complicated Frank Zappa guitar riff that he plays for you. And I was always pretty good. I think he was impressed that I could grasp what he was doing pretty quickly. I had, as he put, good pattern recognition. And and he could play it, and I could spit it back to him pretty quickly. And but the only thing is, it wouldn't necessarily get in my long-term memory yet. So he'd show me this lick, and okay, I got it. And then we'd go work on something else for an hour, and then he'd come back and he says, okay, remember that lick? I played that lick I showed you. And I just like draw a blank, and it's, oh shit, what was it again? And he'd roll his eyes and pick up the guitar and this and, oh yeah, that, oh yeah. And it's just a funny phenomenon. It was an interesting thing. Just I think the way my brain works, I don't know if it's common to all people. I suspect maybe it is. I could learn something like that, and it was as if during that day, the day he showed it to me, it's as if it was in short-term memory somehow. But then when I'd go home and I'd sleep on it and wake up the next day, it's like somehow when I slept, my brain transferred that file into the long-term memory folder, where it couldn't evaporate so quickly. And so by the next day, then I had that lick, and I'd remember it, and I wouldn't forget it. So it could be partly because he's showing you so many things, and he might change it too. It's like, oh, wait a minute, don't do it quite like that. Do it like this. And so maybe my brain is waiting to totally memorize it until it's like, okay, you left rehearsal, and that's the last way he told you to do it. So store that one in long-term memory.
So, and in that process, are you seeing yourself change as how you would define yourself as a musician, as an artist? Is it sort of opening up different areas where you were like, man, I don't know if I would have ever advanced or become this type of musician had you not been in? It's such a diverse music form genre that he created.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things I talk about in my book is how he would challenge you. It's like he'd show you something. Oh, can you do that? Oh, okay, cool. Can you do it up an octave? Oh, okay, cool. Can you do it up an octave double time? Oh, okay. Can you do it up an octave double time and dance at the same time? Oh, okay. And can you sing a vocal part while you're doing that? And he just keep pushing you, partly to see, how far he could push you, and he'd ask me to do things that on my own I probably would have not even attempted to do, because I'd think, well, that's just too difficult. That's impossible. I couldn't possibly do that. But then I'm thinking, well, Frank's asking me to do it, and he thinks maybe I can do it, so I don't know, maybe I can. And so I'd try it and concentrate and work as hard as I could, and sometimes, well, by golly, I can do it after all. And so very much so, he pushed me to be a better musician. And of course, the other thing that pushed me to be a better musician, you mentioned playing with the other players. I'd mentioned Vinnie Colaiuta in specifically because, I've always had, I think, a pretty good sense of rhythm, I'd say, fairly decent time, until I played with Vinnie Colaiuta, and then I realized what real good time was. It's like, oh, I've been kind of close, but Vinny's like, he could play as precisely as a machine, and I thought, oh, okay, I still got some refining to do in the time department, and really made me focus on that. It's like, I tend to rush a little bit. I gotta mentally, it's my natural tendency to rush a little bit, so I focus my mind and keep in the back of my mind, okay, don't rush, play it. If anything, aim a little behind the beat maybe, and you'll be where you want to be. And to this day, I still kind of, that's my natural tendency. So whenever I play, I'm very mindful of not rushing. I had actually an organ teacher who put it in a really great way, talking about, here's how you do it. Don't play that note until the last possible nanosecond. Wait and play it at the right time. Which was just kind of a good mental way to think about it. Hold off. Whatever you do, don't play it ahead. Because you certainly, it just, with bass and drums, you're thinking about a kick drum and a bass note. If they're supposed to land together, you really don't want the bass note hitting before the kick drum. If it's got to be off a little bit, it's much better if it's a little behind, because if it's a little ahead, you kind of get that bum. You get a little bit of the bass note and then the thud from the kick drum. When they're right together, it's like one event almost. And if it's slightly behind, that's okay, because you hear the thud, the attack of the kick drum, and the bass note, even if it comes slightly afterwards, you don't notice it, because then you hear the note of the bass. But like I say, if it sucks, if it's ahead, for the most part, unless you want that certain edge, that sort of punky kind of almost garage band feeling that you get when the bass is kind of rushing. I mean, that's a thing in itself. But generally speaking, for my money, I'd rather have it land right on or right behind.
You mentioned your book, Of Course I Said Yes, which is an awesome book title if ever there was one. It really is a book about, yeah, great title. It's a book really about your life in music. It isn't just necessarily about the bass. It isn't just necessarily about your time with Zappa. And what I find most interesting is, it didn't end in the 80s. Obviously, here we are chatting about a very amazing career path that you've led, which included solo discs, a lot of soundtrack work, playing with some other amazing artists like Robby Krieger from The Doors and Joe Cocker and Diana Ross and Billy Idol. We'll go through some of that hopefully in a bit. I'm also fascinated because I'm sure when you look back on the body of work that you've had, which is, it's a long time. You're talking 40 plus year career here. Is it hard to get out of the Zappa though? Because it's got this. I mean, Zappa always has this sort of heavy gravity to him.
Well, why would I want to get out of Zappa? It's great. People wouldn't be buying my book if it wasn't for the Zappa part. I don't think. I mean, that's my. I mean, I'm not. It doesn't bother me at all to say that was my main claim to fame. It's a badge of honor.
But did you know? But did you know, like when you were there? I'm going to go on to solo albums. I'm going to go on to this. Like, what's your head? Are you like, hey, this ride's going to ride forever? Like, what are you thinking when you're in that environment? Like, what you're going to do next? How do you?
Don't even think of that. I was so just involved in what I was doing, and you do have the sense that it'll go on forever. That's true. I had that with Zappa. I had that during the Giorgio time. But turns out it doesn't go on forever, and things change.
How does it end? How did it end for you?
With the Zappa thing? Well, there were sort of personal reasons, but I'd done it for a couple of years, and part of it was I was just sort of getting. I don't know, just sort of. I'm not a great road person. First of all, I'm just. Especially now, I don't really care to fly very much, and I'm just not a great road guy. And I was just getting kind of. You talk about the drugs and stuff. There was a lot of that going on. It's sort of decadent. Even Frank, even though he didn't do drugs, he had his sort of decadent side. Like I don't know, it was this silly stuff. Like he had heard that. Tom Jones, female fans would take off their underwear and throw it on stage. So he started requesting that girls take off their underpants and throw them on stage, and that became a thing. And that was kind of just like, really, Frank, is that is that necessary? And it got a whole bunch of them. Ended up stringing them off the stage, and then I would, I remember one time we were playing some show, and there's, every once in a while there'd be some crazy girl out in the audience who stands up and flashes her boobs, and of course that girl always ends up backstage after the show, and I walk into the food room, and there she is with her top off, and Frank is smearing mustard and mayonnaise and ketchup all over her breasts, and I don't know, that it just kind of got to me, that kind of stuff. And at one point he made some tape of him, having sex with some woman, and had the sound engineer play that tape through the PA system when he was taking his solos and stuff, and I just, it was just sort of hard on this, like I say, personal reasons I don't really want to go into, but I also kind of felt like, well, I really love Frank, and I'd seen other people, leave the band and split with the band on bad terms with him. He had that thing of the old mother sued him, and I said, well, I don't want to stay in so long that I have a falling out with him somehow. I decided, it's best if I think I just need to leave now and just, do something else. I'd been writing my own songs for a while and thought maybe I'd pursue a solo career. The truth is, though, I did that. Of course, as obviously my songwriting career didn't go anywhere, couldn't get any interest. But, a short time later, it was a bit of a gap. But by 1983, I hooked up with Giorgio Moroder and was working for him full time in a whirlwind. That was very, very quick the way that happened. I had kind of two recommendations from him from different friends saying Georgia was riding high on the Flashdance thing then. He had just had a song, that What a Feeling song, going up the charts, and he suddenly needed to find some good keyboard players. And there weren't, in 1883, there weren't really all that many synth guys in LA. I had bought a Jupiter 8. I'd kind of went out on a limb and spent $5,000 on my Jupiter 8, which I still have right here. And I started getting some synth work with that, because I can certainly play keyboards well enough to play like pop stuff. It's easy.
Well, you were doing Moog electronic music labby stuff almost before, same time you started playing bass in the 70s.
Right, before actually. Yeah, like I say, there was the Moog synthesizers at North Texas, which was one of the reasons I wanted to go there. And so, yeah, I was way into that then, and I've just always been interested in it ever since I heard Switched on Bach. I still love analog synths. But anyway, when I went up, got the audition and went up to Giorgio's beautiful mansion in Beverly Hills. He's very wealthy. He wrote, I think, what is it? I don't know, 11 number one songs and has 3 Academy Awards. So, very successful guy. Anyway, went to his house and went to the studio, and I was very pleased to see that he had a couple of the Jupiter 8s. And I said, "Oh, great! He's got one I know how to work." And he gave me a cassette of a song and just told me to do a version of it. Stuck with the engineer, Dave Concourse, who has been a great friend to me over the years. And we put something together, and it was good enough, and he liked it and got everything to work. Back then it was before like sequencers or computers and stuff. So, you had a drum machine, had the Lindrum there. It has like a trigger output, and you take that and put that into a arpeggiator input on the Jupiter 8, and that's how you get that trigger bass. We call that digga 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 mechanical thing. And so you had to know how to make all that stuff work to get it going on. And I guess I passed the audition. Suddenly I was just in a whirlwind, and within a week or two, I think it was just about a week or 10 days after I started working for him, he flew me out to New York, and we were working on an album for Irene Cara, because he had a hit song with What a Feeling, but no album to go with it other than the soundtrack album for the movie. And so suddenly we're there, and we're working on all these new songs, and he was encouraged us to, hey, write a song. If it's any good, we'll try to get it on the album. We need songs. Of course, he kept the publishing, but I mean, that's okay. Getting 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing. So,
but it's a bit kooky, Arthur, because Giorgio is widely known or credited with pioneering synth disco. I mean, electronic music.
Oh yeah.
I know that in having studied him in early days, like while Flashdance, What a Feeling, huge hit. He was super proud of his work with Berlin's infamous Take My Breath Away from the Top Gun soundtrack, which I believe you did work on as well.
Yeah, in fact, pretty much everything you hear on that, except for the guitars and I guess maybe the drum machine programming, is me. Except for the vocals, of course.
So it's fascinating that you're in this sort of subversive Zappa counter, and talk about 180 in terms of career skills, capabilities. Was the passion just in the fact that you love making music, or were you ever really I was going to ask you earlier, what kind of music are you really into? Because you're walking into a Zappa room, and then, but it's true, if you follow what you've done, it's wild that was another sort of timeline for that is so insane that you go from Zappa and what he was doing into that world.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it couldn't be more of a 180, but it wasn't really my first 180. There was a 180 leading into Zappa.
Right.
I mentioned just quickly, I was playing, right before I auditioned for Zappa, I was playing in Disneyland with a band called the Taylor Sisters playing top 40 music, and we were in Tomorrowland in the Coke Pavilion, which was a stage which was below ground level, and we'd rise up playing some cheesy little pop song. So that was a big 180 going from that to Zappa, and then like you say, another one going to Giorgio. But I'll just say that one of the things I figured playing with Zappa, I kind of proved to myself and to the world or whatever that I could play complicated Zappa. The sort of I would say I don't know. I consider the Zappa's band the sort of, how could I put this? As it's like intellectual rock, and in terms of like rock bands, it's probably the most advanced music that's ever been done. Nothing against other
No, I think it's
progressive bands, but
yeah, and I think it's fair to say I mean, I get that for you it might be hard to say because you were a part of it, but I don't think if you pulled anybody off the street who has a passion for music and you said, define Frank Zappa's music, and so many people would point to it as being exactly that: super complex, super rich. Has music like that ever been done or recreated? I mean, for sure. So I think it's totally fair to go there.
So I kind of figured, well, I proved that I could do that. Okay, well, now there's a whole other realm that I was interested in. Well, what does it take to write, to create a pop song, to do something that'll make people actually pull out their wallets and buy it, So I figured, well, that was another challenge for me, and it was an equal challenge, and Giorgio was a great teacher for that. Unfortunately, I never wrote my number one hit, so I can't, spend my time relaxing in Hawaii or whatever. But I certainly did learn a lot from Giorgio. Like, for example, he had three basic rules about starting a track. First of all, Giorgio only cared about a hit. If the song didn't have hit potential, it was a waste of time as far as Giorgio was concerned. He was completely commercial that way and unabashed about it. So he had three basic rules. He said, first of all, you have to have the right song. If the song isn't good, if it doesn't have hit potential, you're wasting your time. The second one has to be in the right key for the singer. And the third one, it has to be the right tempo. If you don't have those three basic things, you're screwed. If you start recording at the wrong tempo or if you're in the wrong key for the singer. So just that, I mean, it seems kind of real basic and obvious, but believe me, there's plenty of people who make that mistake. They'll start recording a track in the wrong key before they've even just decided who's going to sing it. And in Giorgio's case, you mentioned Take My Breath Away. One of the interesting things about that is that it was for a movie. So the first thing that happens is for Top Gun. So, Giorgio writes the song, gets some demo singer to sing it, and a movie company likes it. Okay, that's our song. We're going to do it. Now we got to figure out who's going to sing it. And we went through 5 or maybe 6 different singers before they finally decided on Terry Nunn. And so we recorded that whole track, and like I say, this is before the time of sequencers or computers, so everything was played by hand except for like the drum machine programming and trigger bass stuff. We recorded 5 or 6 complete versions of Take My Breath Away in different keys for different singers, which was just an interesting experience in itself. And it's funny. I worked with a guitar player, Richie Zito, who was a little guy, a little Italian American guy from Brooklyn, who was a guitar player, and he was pretty funny. And I remember asking him one time. He had a little more experience than I did, and said, "Well, Richie, how do they decide who's going to sing a song for a big movie like this?" And he says, "Well, basically, you start with the Beatles and you work your way down."
Hilarious.
Pretty funny. So yeah, I mean, I've kind of lost my train of thought, but
we were talking about the genre and going into that world and how you feel about that transitioning out of the Zappa world.
Well, it was amazing and quite challenging, and I worked a lot. I mean, there were so many different projects going on. I think I mentioned in my book a couple of my days, working like 12, 14, 16-hour days, day after day. And it was great. It was a great experience. Never had experience working on soundtracks before. I got to work on Scarface and Top Gun and some others a little bit, and I was making good money, and enough that that's what enabled me in 1985. I rented this space that I'm still in here and was able to buy some equipment, so enabled me to have a studio. I never made enough money with Frank to do anything like that. And also, I have to say, I don't know if you're aware, Frank had a sort of a negative attitude towards unions, particularly the musicians' unions, because he didn't like the rules about how if you doubled, say, if you played bass and guitar, that you're supposed to get more money for that. Or if you're working on, after regular business hours at night or on the weekends, you're supposed to get extra
double time. Yeah, you get double time.
Yeah. And so he hated all that. And, and I can understand that to some degree. It's not like, if you were working on an Eagles album that's going to sell a jillion copies, then yeah, by God, you ought to get paid every cent that the union rules say you should get. But I knew Frank's records didn't really sell a lot, and I was happy to be working on them. And I would just, he would ask me if it was okay if working on a Sunday, just pay your regular scale, and I'd say yeah, sure, it's fine, whatever.
We can't also just waft over the fact that Richie Zito isn't just a guitarist, but probably also became one of the legendary American songwriters, composers, record producers in LA, and also went on to an amazing career as well. I mean, pretty lauded dude.
But Richie was really something. He had also played with Randy Newman in a previous, and several other people before he hooked up with Giorgio. But
so if you're thinking about your career, do you feel for your own work, and not what you're contributing, but when you're doing your own work, that there's a sort of set creative process, or has the diversity of what you worked in, from again being in what I can only consider to be the crazy world of Zappa to the world of Giorgio and then the world of solo albums, do you have a set creative process, or did all of that diversity sort of feed a creative impulse that keeps you very erratic in terms of how you work and do things?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say, well, it's both erratic and pragmatic. I've been working with Robby Krieger, and
From the Doors,
things go slowly in his world, but he's coming over today in about another hour to try. We're trying to write some new music. We finished an album a few years ago that actually got nominated for a Grammy called Singularity, and that was mostly stuff that he and I wrote together. And when I say pragmatic, I think to myself, I look at, okay, well, here are the new songs that we got. You know what, we need an up-tempo funk one. That we got too many songs that are in this kind of tempo range. And so I'll say, oh, okay, well, let me write something like that. And so from a pragmatic viewpoint, I say, well, we need something like that. So I'll come up with that. Or, when I've done my silent movie scores, it's like, well, I've done 3 of them. My favorite one is the Greta Garbo one, The Torrent. And it's like, wow, shit, it's like almost a 90-minute movie, and I got to come up with 90 minutes of music, and where is it going to come from? I got to come up with something. So you just start, looking, and I watched the film, and at the end, it's kind of weird because she's an opera singer, so you got a silent movie about a singer, which is kind of weird. And at the end, at the very end of the movie, she's in a theater and on stage, and she's performing Bizet's Carmen, pieces from that. And so I listened to some of Carmen. I thought, well, I got some inspiration for that. And it has so many great pieces, that piece. And there's that one that goes dun 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 dun. And I thought, okay, well, let me start to use those. That's minor and descending. So for the little hometown peaceful, placid scene at the beginning, I took it and I used a Spanish guitar and made it major and ascending. So I wrote a melody went dun 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 dun. Okay, there, I got a starting point, and take it from there. And just you look at a movie and sit down at a keyboard, look at a scene and sit down at a keyboard and just start coming up with something because you have to. Sometimes it's because you just absolutely have to. And then, for my own stuff, I think, well, okay, well, I'm not at all embarrassed about being, heavily influenced by Zappa in my own compositions because I really like it. And I think, well, let's start off with something that's sort of Zappa-like, okay, I want something I'll take a song like there was a song called Project X that he had, and I liked the texture of it. It had a strumming acoustic guitar playing some nice chords and then a sort of fast angular melody over it. And I thought, okay, well, to make it sort of cool and modern sounding, you have an angularity to your melodic approach, and you have maybe lots of leaps instead of stepwise motion and things like that you can do to make it sound kind of modern, if you will. And I go with that. So It depends on the circumstances. We also, with the Robby Band, we've written some tunes as a group. The whole band gets in there, and we start jamming and come up with ideas. Maybe Robby will have a guitar idea, and we go off on that, and everybody contributes a little bit. And we've come up with some good things there. But I don't like that. Does that give you a better idea?
Yeah, it's great. And so I'm curious now. Now I want to have you reflect a little bit on your life and your music and the work that you do. How do you see the electric bass today in terms of who you are as a musician, what you're trying to do with this instrument now?
Wow. Well, what I'm trying to do with the instrument now? Well, I'm still practicing.
It's important.
I honestly, I'm afraid I'm a bit of a negligent bass player sometimes, because if I'm not like on the road touring and playing every day, sometimes I'm afraid it's horrible to admit this, because I know this is a horrible, horrible thing, but I won't practice for a while. I'll like go for a few weeks and not pick the thing up, which, of course sucks, because then your calluses start to go away. But I got some stuff coming up. So, I'm practicing, making myself practice for an hour or so every day. And I don't know. I don't see myself as a proponent of advancing what can be done on the bass guitar per se. I would like to think in terms of refining my playing and my tone and particularly coming up with interesting bass lines. I'd say, if anything, that might be the thing that I guess stands out in terms of what I would say I can kind of contribute, is to come up with really cool grooves and cool lines and stuff. But the big leap, obviously, for the bass guitar was Jaco Pastorius. It completely changed the world. As he was the Jimi Hendrix for bass players. And that's. It's so obviously he was just absolutely brilliant, and as I said earlier, he got a fretless bass and emulated him for a while, but he's absolutely mastered that. There's no way I'll ever be as good as he was, and I wouldn't want to be just another Jaco imitator, and take the frets out of the fretboard and use his kind of amp and learn all his licks and all that stuff. He already did that, and he did it to perfection. So there's really no point in me doing it. I think of myself, honestly, more as I'm a bass player first in terms of my main performing instrument. I will occasionally play some guitar in a live band, like I did a couple of years ago with Band from Utopia. But as an overall musician, I guess I think of myself just, I don't know, as a composer and an arranger and a teacher, I guess now. One of the things we haven't mentioned is one of the favorite things that I've been doing in the last few years is going to universities like in North Texas and putting on concerts of Zappa music there. I've done it three times at North Texas and once in the University of South Dakota, and hoping to do more. I possibly have one coming up in Utah next year. But I really, really love that. I think I'm finally awakening the teaching gene in me. I've doing these things at North Texas were just great. And I was very lucky because there's Dr. Joseph Klein, that's the head of the composition department there, who is a Zappa fan. And every 3 years he's been teaching a class on Zappa. And I got in touch with him some years ago, and when I found out he was doing it, and told him, hey, what can I do to help? I played with Frank Zappa and I went to North Texas, let's do something. And so he's been bringing me there, and I just totally love it. And one of the things that forced me to do is I got hold of a music notation software. I use Sibelius, and that's where I do the arrangements for these. I don't know if you've seen any of the North Texas things I've done.
Yeah, sure.
But I write for a very large group. I've got, bass, drums, 2 guitars, keyboards, 4 horns, 5 singers, and half a stage full of percussion equipment. I write for everything that Zappa music that the Zappa music that I want to play requires. Marimba and xylophone and vibes and glockenspiel and gongs and chimes and timpani and everything. And the beautiful thing about doing it in a university setting like that, especially a wonderful school like North Texas, first of all, we're in this beautiful concert hall, and you have your choice of 3 different beautiful grand pianos, and all the percussion stuff is like right across the hallway, and they wheel it all out, and boom, it's all ready to go, and you get these great young players, and I spent a lot of time working on the arrangements. It's really quite intensive work to get those together, working for months beforehand. And, you have to go through the audition process of, having Dr. Klein at the other end find the players. And once we settle on them, then I want to get them their charts as soon as possible. And this last year, I also made use of Skype, with the various musicians, had Skype calls with almost all of them, and I want to do that as early as possible to get them on the right track so they know that they're practicing the stuff correctly. Particularly with the guitar players, there's things about Frank's guitar playing that are sort of contrary to what they teach you in music school, especially if you're learning jazz performance guitar. They tend to tell the guitar players to avoid using any open strings for some reason. So I would so I got together with these kids, and they were both great, really good players. But they said, well, let me hear you do this, and they're playing it up on the neck in some convoluted way. And I always have my guitar with me there, and we can see each other on Skype. I said, no, it's just this. It's you use the open strings down here, and you play it that way, and it's like easy. Oh, I see. And to see the light come on, in their heads, it's like, oh, you mean that's all it is? I say, yeah, with Frank, with the guitar part, always look for the easiest way to do it first. You can tell which stuff Frank wrote on the guitar, like A Kid in His Arf. It's a pattern. It's this da-da-da-da-da. Once you have that, you start on E, and then you move it up to the next string and up a fret. And play it again, and then move it to the next string, and then back down a fret, and do it again. You play the same pattern, even though it comes out melodically different when you get to the B string, because it's a third and not a fourth. But it's just, it sounds complicated when you first hear it, but if you just play it on the guitar, it's like, oh, well, that's pretty easy actually, and then it's just a C major scale going down. It's not that big of a deal, and so that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, so it was really helpful that I was able to work with the students beforehand, and then I, go to North Texas and there for a week and put on a concert. And considering we only had 2 full rehearsals, it came off pretty well, I think. And I really enjoy making the arrangements, and also I like to spend a lot of time thinking about the set list itself and the pacing of the show. And this last one last year, I was really pleased with the way that turned out.
And the amazing part is obviously you're introducing that music to the next generation and opening their minds to being exposed to how that composition worked, the tones, the sentiment of the music, which is wild too. Book is called Of Course I Said Yes. It's getting great reviews on Amazon. It's a fascinating book, again, not just about Zappa, but all about Arthur's really fascinating life and music. Arthur, I can't thank you enough. If people want to find out more about you, where's the best place to check out online?
Probably actually would friend me on Facebook.
Perfect.
I'll friend anybody unless they have they're waving Nazi flags or Confederates or
no sociopaths. Yeah.
yeah. And it's otherwise you're pretty much in. Of course, I do get some weird ones from girls from the Philippines who. I don't know. Are you getting those yet?
I think we're all getting those. It has nothing to do with your musical inclinations, Arthur. Yeah. Thank you so much, Arthur.
Okay, Mitch. Thank you so much for doing it. I appreciate it.